So somebody at some point asked me why I think the COVID emergency led to more people on the alt right, and I can't find the comment right now. Like I went looking for it. I don't know what happened to it, but I can actually tell. I can actually should draw you a map basically. In 2018, 2019, I wrote an article called "The Cost of Being Disabled" for Design Sponge. It was a major publication, but it no longer exists anymore. We need to support independent media. But anyways, I interviewed 4 disabled people about their experiences getting jobs, managing money, what that looks like, particularly when you're on benefits and things like that. I may put it on my Patreon for public view at some point for everybody to read. But the one stat that I walked away with that like stuck with me forever is the fact that disabled people pay about 28% more of their income for the same quality of life. Now, a lot of people want to ignore that we are still going through a mass disabling event, but that's exactly what it is. With about 8 to 10% of people having lifelong disabilities from a singular COVID infection, regardless of whether they were symptomatic or asymptomatic. And some estimates show that like nearly 30 to 40% are experiencing long-term symptoms from COVID. We never used to talk about brain fog this often. That's an indicator that people are really impacted by COVID, but just don't know. And in some cases, really don't care. The thing that a lot of people don't realize is that everybody makes money when somebody is disabled, even though disabled people themselves are not making a whole ton of money. Even without a diagnosis, things become very, very difficult for people to manage. And since SNAP is in the news, let's talk about food. SNAP does not allow you to buy prepared foods, but for many disabled people, the physical act of cooking is draining enough that you can't go to work the next day sometimes. So you're probably buying prepared meals, buying more expensive meals, things that are already pre-cooked, that is outside of the SNAP benefit just to get a hot meal. And even if you don't have access to SNAP or food assistance, you still have to cook your food, right? Because the majority of people are not going to pay $40 per meal to get takeout. And the disabled people that are usually crowdfunding just so that they can eat once or twice a day. Not just crowdfunding. I'll get to that in a second. And then you're also thinking about their job performance. You lose your job if you start slowing down and not producing at the same rate as everybody else, even if there's no explanation for it, particularly if there's no explanation for it, right? Because if you're disabled, if you have an official diagnosis, then you could tell your employer, yeah, I have a diagnosis, this is why I'm slowing down, I'm gonna make these accommodations. But if you don't have those things, you can lose your job very quickly. And everybody makes money off of disability, even small things like parking. I live in Philly and I go to the King of Prussia Mall and I'm looking and driving around for an accessible spot on a Saturday, which I hate going to the mall. That's part of the reason why. And they commandeered spaces every 2 to 3 rows that you now have to pay for that used to be accessible parking spaces for disabled vehicles. And so what happens when your life costs 30% more? You Google, you search. You go online. You go into these online spaces about people talking about making money. You get into the Forex groups, the MLMs. You turn to churches, right? That lady that's calling around churches, yes, she's proving that a lot of them will not give to outsiders. That's because they specifically want you to come in a lot of times so that your very survival becomes enmeshed with the church. And a lot of disabled people's entire worlds revolve around church life and conservatism because they literally have access to nowhere else, particularly where they lack paratransit and accessible transit systems. You have to rely on a ride from somebody you know to go anywhere as a disabled person if you're living somewhere where you can't independently do so. The COVID emergency basically streamlined people's abilities to get services so they wouldn't have to rely on systems and scams to make money and keep a roof over their head, which then got them ingrained in communities that are alt-right by nature because they're defined by your ability to earn or your ability to maintain proximity to religious spaces to survive. Another thing that people ask me about that goes in line with this is how do private equity firms make money off of disabled people when disabled people themselves are legislated into poverty? Not only are private equity paid through government programs because you get the service from like Medicaid or Medicare. So there are multiple levels that make money off of disabled people. So let's say you go to a nursing home. I was in a nursing home for 2 to 3 months when I was about 25 years old because I broke my ankle. Luckily, I was young enough to be on my dad's insurance, but let's say I was on Medicaid at the time. Once it is deemed necessary that I go to a nursing home, that nursing home will bill Medicaid to pay for the service. So if that service is a nursing home that is run by private equity is making that money directly from the government to care for me. And the government is using contractors like health insurance companies to be the middle person to deem whether or not they have to actually pay that out. Then there's managed care organizations. There's also surveillance companies, because if you want services in certain parts of the country, they require direct support professionals to carry around GPS to know where the disabled person and their worker is. Not to mention, you have certain private equity companies buying up private property, single family homes, so that disabled people can live in community and get services in smaller case settings. But institutionalization in and of itself is a money maker. When I was working at DRP, for a disabled person to live in the community, that cost was about $26,000 per year. To keep a disabled person institutionalized, though, it was around $150,000 in salaries, jobs. So we were very much so a lot of times advocating against unions who wanted to keep institutions open despite the fact that care outcomes were actually worse. It was only when SEIU started getting into disability advocacy that they actually wrote a letter saying that they were in support of disabled people moving to community settings, which had a massive blow to the institutionalization movement in 2019 at the time. But literally everybody makes money off of disability being extremely expensive. There was this woman online who was in a car accident recently because she was live streaming. I could never even think about that, because the amount of time, effort, and money it took for me to learn how to drive was astronomical. I had to get a prescription to learn how to drive, so I had to go through the medical system. I then had to go to the hospital system to take lessons, at least 20 minimum, to qualify to take the test to drive. They were $100 a pop. And then I had to pay for my car to be modified, right? And that cost about $4,000 to $6,000 at the time. And luckily, I went through vocational rehabilitation, which helped a lot of that cost. But the wait list for services is years long. And it's every little thing, because accessibility for disabled people is considered a luxury for non-disabled people, who then up the price of everything. And so the cost of being disabled is astronomical, which sets people up to be in very vulnerable positions, which is also part of the reason why the domestic violence rate amongst disabled people is extremely high. Because in order to qualify for many services, a lot of them are income-based. And so you have to put all your assets, or hope to put all your assets, either into a special needs trust, which has very specific stipulations, an ABLE account, which also has some very specific stipulations, or you have to put it in the custody of a loved one or somebody you hope loves you, to be a single income household unto yourself to qualify for those services. I know this is a very long video, but this is how that pipeline kind of works.